people look at this phenomenon, and I think part of what's driving the media frenzy with it is it looks ridiculous. Why would anybody do that? Then there's a second thought that comes in that says, oh no, what's really ridiculous is living in my 2,500 square foot house that I have to work 50 hours a week to support, and I don't really have a life. So that's what's ridiculous.
The interest to live tiny within the metropolitan Atlanta is huge. I started Tiny House Atlanta organically a year and a half ago, and it's grown from the first 11 to over 1,150 members. I am contacted weekly on how to build, where to build, who's doing it, why should we do it. I'm giving lectures and speeches to law schools, municipalities, HOAs. So again, people are curious. What does this actually mean? What is this movement, and who wants to be a part of it?
So one of the things about tiny housing that I think often is missed in sort of the bigger conversation about it is it's not really about the housing itself. I mean, obviously we're living in a tiny house, we're building tiny houses, that's something that's going to catch people's attention. But what it's really about is a lifestyle change. So we're really talking about how can we minimize our consumption? How can we lower our costs, our monthly costs? How can we work less? How can we travel less to and from work? But the reality is they're using that job to pay for, in large part, their housing. And housing nationwide costs about 27% of our income goes to housing. Now that's on an average. So it's a way of rethinking our entire way of being so that we can enjoy our lives right now and not work so hard to pay for something that we don't really need.
So then the conversation became, well, what's everyone else doing once they've built their tiny house? And that became the next challenge. That's probably the best answer. It's like, all right, I figured out how to build a tiny house. Now I got to figure out where to put it.
The biggest challenge to living legally in a tiny house really come in the zoning area. I mean, there's challenges in the code as well, but the zoning is really where it's hard, and that's something that has to be dealt with on the local level, because every region, every jurisdiction is going to have a different ordinance in place that manages the size of a house. And typically the minimum size in the US tends to be somewhere around 1,000 square feet, so it can be difficult to get in within those ordinances.
But it's not really a gray area. It's, in most places, it's very clear that, that tiny houses fall outside of what's allowed for permanent residence. And so the ironic thing is it's not preventing people from saying, okay, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and do this. It's not preventing people from doing that. And people are finding ways to deal with that, whether it's finding a community that's zoned properly for this kind of house, or going somewhere where there isn't any zoning, where the zoning is open, or finding some other way of sort of flying under the radar. But we make people aware of that right off the bat, and we think that that's part of what's propelling this movement, is that people are willing to do this, willing to sort of pioneer this idea.
So I think it's an exciting movement with 3 hurdles: financing, zoning, building standards.
We talk about it as like 2 different sides to an apple. So coding is the house itself. Coding is the unit and the structure itself. It's what it's built to. Is it built to a housing code? Is it built to an RV code? Is it an ANSI park model? Is it IRC? It's what it's built to, okay? And those are regulated by either national or local bodies. Like if you're building a site-built home, you have to build it to that county's or city's code. And then the zoning is where the unit goes. And the zoning goes, it goes from federal to state to county to city, municipality, all the way down to an individual plot. So another misconception out there is people that are saying, well, we want the one silver bullet that makes these tiny houses legal everywhere. And it will never happen, never. Because you can never take one encompassing code or law that makes both of those fit in every location. The zoning is where it goes, and the coding, and both of those 2 things have to match. They have to match.
So there's definitely interest here in the city of Ashland of using tiny houses in a couple of different ways, which is pretty exciting to see. And we're starting to see that in a lot of towns across the US now. seeing how tiny houses can go from being sort of this offbeat, unusual thing to a normal type of housing that has benefits for both the people living in it and for the cities in which will be permitting those structures.
We need to figure out how to define a tiny house, and then from there look at land use, zoning, neighborhood acceptability, because some neighborhoods are not going to want them, and we need to decide, do we need to have a pocket of them somewhere, or do we need to have them scattered everywhere? Or there's so many questions with tiny houses, because this is really a new concept.
The biggest thing is going to be looking at what the ordinances are and try to figure out why those ordinances are in place. In some cases, they may have been passed a long time ago, and you may ask your building officials, so why is there a 1,000 square foot minimum? And they may not know the answer to that. So if they don't know the answer to that, that means that there's the potential for you to have a conversation with them about potentially putting something in that's less than 1,000 square feet and show why that's a good idea. In some places, they may know exactly why they have that minimum, and so once you know what the answer is, you can look at, well, how can I work within the scope of what they're trying to accomplish and still have a smaller house? So you can go through that and look at, these are the reasons why, and here's how, even though my house is tiny, it still meets the intent of those codes or ordinances.
I'm Renee Hardy. I'm the Florida State Chapter Leader of the American Tiny House Association, and we are in Rockledge, Florida, and this is my 2,000 square foot house that I'm looking to ditch and get a tiny house.
I'm Jim McKnight. I'm City Manager of the City of Rockledge, Florida. We are currently located here at Rockledge City Hall in the center of the City of Rockledge, the oldest city in Brevard County.
I knew absolutely nothing about zoning. I am a physicist by trade. I know nothing about development, real estate, zoning, building codes. I knew nothing, not a thing. So I guess you could say that put me in a, well, not a unique position, but maybe in an interesting position when I did go to the city, because they're used to people who do know those things. And if you can approach your city not knowing anything and really just go kind of on an information or fact-finding type of meeting, I know that my city was very accepting of my questions, and they just answered the questions, and I just kept asking.
The City of Rockledge, we always think about how we can meet the needs of our residents in our community. And so when we get a request, we want to honor it.
When I approached the city, the first thing that I did was I just asked them, or I basically told them my goals. You know, I said, this is what my family wants. We want to stay in Rockledge because we love it here, and we also want to have a smaller footprint than I think is allowed, and these are the reasons why. We want more quality time with the family. We want to put our money in places that we care about, like in the community, going out to eat, those types of things, versus extra space in our house that we're not using, or maybe even to kids' college funds or retirement. So I kind of gave them a list of things that I said, you know, this is why we want to do it. This is what we want to do. These are the reasons why. What are our options? What can we do here? You know, within current zoning regulations, what is it that we can do? And they sat back and they said, it's really interesting. Nobody has ever asked us that before. We don't even know how to answer you. Because everybody that has ever approached us has wanted to go bigger. They wanted, how can we put an addition on our house? How can we, you know, make more storage space? Those types of things. And no one's ever asked us to go tiny. We don't even know how to answer you. So I first met with the city. I met with the city planner and the planning director, kind of in charge of the zoning of the city. I met with them first, and that was just an informal meeting to just talk about, discuss options. From there, I did ask them that question, where do we go next, guys? Like, what should I do? Do we have another meeting about this? And they said, we want you, as a concerned citizen, to send a letter to the city manager. And you send a letter to that city manager, and that way it's not coming from us, it's coming from the people. asking for it. And you just tell him exactly what you told us about what your goals are for your family, why you want to stay here, how this is going to help you, how this solution is going to help you achieve your goals. Would you consider, allowing smaller square footage housing in Rockledge?
I had never even heard of tiny houses until Renee Hardy, one of our local residents, contacted me and asked for a meeting, and we sat down together and discussed the concept. I had to really kind of research it myself, read some materials on it to begin to understand. I'm sure it's right for a lot of people.
I mean, he must have replied easily within 24 hours. And his reply was so positive, and it was so encouraging because he said the words, "The Hardys have their priorities straight." It touched me because I was just like, that's exactly what I would hope would be the reaction.
And I recommended that she meet with our staff, and she did. And then it proceeded from there to our planning commission, and the city council also was apprised of it. And they sent it to the Planning Commission to iron out some recommendations on how we would place it within our code, where we would place it within our code, and what specifications we would put on it.
Like to think of ourselves, we're almost built out. We have like 10% of our property left in the city. So now we're in the process of developing that and also the redevelopment.
I gave them an option. I said, well, okay, so 1,200 square feet, that's the minimum. Can I build 2 600 square feet houses and like connect them with like a covered breezeway or something? And they sat back in their chair and they said, I suppose you could, as long as it was connected to the same foundation. And I said, oh, okay. And then they said, oh, as long as one of them doesn't have a kitchen, because you can't have 2 houses on the same plot of land and have 2 kitchens. And I said, okay, well, what's a kitchen? See, the questioning, you just keep asking, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? So yeah, what's a kitchen? Oh, a kitchen has a stove in it. Okay, so as long as I don't have a stove, I can have everything else in the kitchen. I can have a microwave, a toaster, a dishwasher, a fridge, burners on the countertops. I can have everything of that and just not have a stove, and it won't be a kitchen. And they said yes. And so I said, okay, let's take this a step further. If I can build 2 600 square foot houses and have them connected with the same foundation with like a covered breezeway, then I could build 4 300 square foot houses, right? And still be within the 12. And I said I could imagine them being in like a square situation connected by covered breezeways. Maybe in the middle you'd throw a garden or some type of community thing. And that's where the community started to kind of come out of the whole discussion. So when I first walked in, it was more of a one-off. How can we get one for ourselves? And just through talking through the zoning and asking the questions and trying to figure out how we can make this work, a community kind of evolved out of it. And that's when I brought up the Ross Chapin pocket communities that have been happening in the Northwest. And I just brought up pictures of that, and I said, this is actually really nice. And they said, ooh, we love that, and that works exactly with kind of what you're saying, and it just kind of went from there.
In order for tiny homes to fit into the city, what would be its function? We thought the main idea was to make sure that we created sort of like a community. So that got us interested in doing a pocket neighborhood. A pocket neighborhood basically is a centralized common area surrounded by homes.
We have a great team here with Don Griffin and Mr. McKnight, who have just been, always allow us to think, okay, what's the best and greatest use of a piece of land, and how do we meet the needs of our residents? And so when Renee approached us, we were able to say, okay, let's look at this. How do we do this? Where would it fit? Where would it not fit? We, back in the 70s, Rockledge had a lot of big parcels that were developable for your standard 3-2 house. We don't have that anymore. Now we have small little parcels that are infill, and they're harder to develop. That being the case, what's the highest and best use for that land? Well, maybe a tiny house community in a pocket neighborhood.
Basically, it's in 2 areas. You can do it under a planned unit development, and planned unit developments were created for unique developments, usually very larger ones. Recently, and as a part of this process, we've actually diminished that a little somewhat, where you can have a smaller development that can come under PUD that would allow the flexibility to create what we've identified as the pocket villages with the tiny house communities. As everyone knows, there's a need for housing in our country, in our state, in our county, in our city. It doesn't mean we have to do everything the traditional old way, okay? So whether it's looking at apartments or single-family houses, condominiums, or some other form of housing, tiny houses have a place in that, I believe. There is a demand for it. And so our thoughts were, where do we put it that it would be appropriate? These two areas, the redevelopment mixed use and the planned unit development, are both created with flexibilities that I think would be necessary to set up some appropriate pocket villages for tiny houses.
We, at that point, directed it to the Planning Commission. Our Planning Commission, they were totally excited about the pocket neighborhoods and creating, basically, you're talking about little neighborhoods. And again, we do restrict it to no more than 12 units in each one of these. Now, nothing says you can't build 30 subdivisions in a row and have something bigger than that, but we wanted to restrict it to 12 right off the bat. So then if it worked on a smaller scale, we might be able to go up to a larger scale down the road. Land development regulations are always changing. And I think in the city of Rockledge, we're kind of progressive on that particular aspect.
So the Planning Commission, it's a little more informal than what you saw last night at City Council. And there's lots more discussion going on. So, you know, they brought the ideas to them, and it was more of like back and forth. Like I might go up to the podium and they might ask me some questions, or they would ask Don or Alex some questions, and back and forth. And these are our concerns. Well, what about this? Have you thought about that? What about pets? I
we got a basic package together with very, very, God, I would say we didn't have a lot of detail to them. So Planning Commission approved that, and they said, take it to City Council. We took it to City Council. We had one City Council member says, I'd like to have more definition. So Councilman O'Neill asked that we have more definition included into it, which included at that time, we had the TOWs, the tiny homes on wheels. So we added that provision in there. We added definitions, we added setbacks, size of lots. And so the Planning Commission reviewed all that information at the next meeting that we had with them.
When the city was open to allowing tiny houses on wheels here, one of the biggest concerns was creating some sort of transient lifestyle, and they didn't want to create that. So the way they got around that was to require front and rear porches on all houses. So if you do have a tiny house on wheels, you can pull it in, but now you have to put a front porch and a rear porch on the house. And what that does is it creates cohesion with the community, because all the houses have front and rear porches. The foundation ones do, obviously, that are going to stay there. And so it creates a cohesive look to the community, and it also discourages, you know, leaving for the weekend and then coming back. But Rockledge is really looking for a community of people that want to stay here and kind of put roots here. But they want to also allow them to live in the types of, you know, structures that they want to live in. So that's why they're allowing the tiny houses on wheels.
When you deal with something that's different, and this is different, one of the things you have to look at is its overall impact on your community. Some of the things we were concerned about, knowing they were going to be smaller houses, was how do we put them in some type of development that makes sense? Where do you put them so that they don't affect the market values of other housing? Because obviously, if you're in the middle of an area and you have a minimum requirement of 3,000 square feet, and you have large lots, and you drop a tiny house community in there, there's a concern that obviously would be, well, is this going to diminish value? So I think our largest task was, where do we go with these?
And so the Planning Commission reviewed all that information at the next meeting that we had with them. They tweaked some of the changes and directed it back to City Council. It went back to City Council. They were elated even more at this time, and they instructed the city attorney to prepare an ordinance for the adoption. And then we went through the first reading and then the second reading, and the second reading was September 23rd, which was last night, and it passed overwhelmingly.
Ordinance number 1680-2015, an ordinance of the City of Rockledge, Brevard County, Florida, amending Chapter 7 of the Rockledge Land Development Regulations to add a Section 70.90 providing for tiny houses in pocket neighborhoods as a use within the redevelopment mixed use RMU and planned unit development PUD districts, declaring that invalidity of any portion hereof shall not affect the remaining portions of this ordinance, providing for the effective date hereof and for other purposes.
Let's move for the adoption of this ordinance.
Second. We have a motion. We have a second. Do we have any further discussion?
Call for the question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And the move today, what I've seen, and there hasn't been much going on for the last 10 years, folks, because there's not a lot of building going on in Brevard County. But the move today is smaller and higher quality. Whereas 10 years ago, everybody wanted a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot house. Nobody wants that today. They want smaller and they want higher quality. So I think this is a movement that is taking off, not only in Rockledge, but throughout the United States. And I think we're going to see more of this, and I think we did the right thing here tonight.
In this case, it was started by a citizen, and the process was to work with staff, the Planning Commission, which is the advisory board to the City Council, and the City Council itself. So it's not like it's just being done by one group, but the point being is that when you have multiple eyes looking at it, you get different questions from different areas, and therefore I hope we've been comprehensive in our approach. We find out as we move forward in this process, there may be some tweaking that's required in order to be to achieve the end goal, which is to create some nice communities for those who are interested in this style and this size of housing.
The day after our last meeting, when I had the copy of the agenda containing this ordinance, I clipped this ordinance out of my agenda and put it in the mail to my daughter, who some of you know is the director of Habitat for Humanity up in St. Johns County, and I mailed it up to her. 2 days later, it was on Facebook, and she's getting ready to take it to St. Johns County and St. Augustine County Commission and City Council. You just never know how something that you do that can turn into something more. And so I just wanted to share that it's already being spread around.
Well, I think if you're talking about in other locations that may be considering this, first of all, you need to do your research. You need to actually review what's out there, get the information, and there's a growing amount of information.
I would start with the planners and ask whether or not you can have a joint meeting with the, if it's the mayor who's in charge. Mm-hmm. If the mayor's in charge, meet with the planners and the mayor. If the city manager, if they have a city manager type government, meet with the city manager and the planning staff and come up with a cohesive idea right up front. Like I said, these, and then giving us ideas, you know, and the actual that Renee brought us is just fantastic. I mean, she even showed us the pocket neighborhood concept. That got us going to start our research.
And if I had some advice to give to people that were wanting to approach their city to bring tiny houses into their neighborhood, my advice would be to just go and start the dialogue, okay? Go and start the dialogue. You don't have to have any experience whatsoever. You just have to be a citizen of that city. And the city is there, and they're there to help ensure that they are meeting the needs of their citizens.
Well, Mr. Mayor and Council, I must say that I am in awe of the support that you have shown towards the acceptance of this tiny house movement. On behalf of the American Tiny House Association, I would like to offer a sincere thank you for moving forward with this ordinance. And I am so honored to live in such a place like Rockledge, Florida, with such forward-thinking and innovative city leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Apparently we're the leaders of the state. Am I not right?
Oh, leaders?
Is there anybody else in the state?
Leaders in America.
Hopefully it'll catch on in other communities, and that for those, again, for those who want to be a part of this style of housing, they should have the opportunity, and it really makes sense. And I'm glad we were, one of the first to be a part of it. I think it's going to reflect well on our community, and it's going to hopefully make people want to live here.
So there's a lot of advantages that tiny homes could bring to a community.
Think about what drives value in our economy and our society. Bigger isn't always better. Well thought out, well planned, well designed products and services are those that tend to generate the most value. And I think the same is true when it comes to housing in our communities. Housing that really takes an intentional approach to solving the needs of every citizen in concert with the entire community, not in isolation. So a collaborative, community-based perspective that truly does look at sustainability from the perspective of people at all price points being in the equation.
For me, tiny house is freedom. I don't have to work when I don't want to work. I can do other things. Like, I love my house, it's beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's still a thing. What I love about it more is the opportunities that it allows me. So I think that's the big thing about the tiny house movement is it's not really about the houses, it's about the life that comes with the house.
The boomers who are looking at retirement, wanting to downsize, wanting to live on a fixed income, and the millennials who maybe haven't started their families yet and are looking for a creative way to maybe put some money aside.
Like right now, we would never choose to purchase land and buy a big home in Texas because we don't want this to be our permanent home, but we can be here for a shorter time because our house is on wheels. So it just seems like, why wouldn't everyone want that? Like less commitment, more flexibility. Originally, the impetus for that was just having no clue where I was going to be, even in a few months. So I was like, I certainly can't buy a normal home. And I just wanted to get out of the rental market. I was spending so much money. And so the only way I could own a home was to have it on wheels.
Well, when we think about sustainability in this conversation, actually we have a huge upside. Number one, less materials means less impact on our environment, on our long-term quality of life. The energy efficiency and the use of, or the drain on the grid, our electricity, our power, whatever sources you may choose, could definitely be impacted as we begin to scale with affordable homes that have a much smaller, probably 1/10 of the power usage of a larger home, a standard American home, would be the use of a tiny home. And that's a big difference. And then if you add additional alternative uses of sources of power, such as solar, or they're heat and coal efficient, it really makes for a wonderful experience at a lower price point across every level, not just the materials, not just the impact on the environment, but also on the ongoing carry costs and the ongoing operational and maintenance costs, and ultimately that footprint that it has, the carbon footprint for our society.
We had a $4 electric bill. $4. We can live with that. So I would define the tiny house movement as simple downsizing of your problems. You go tiny, you get rid of a lot of stuff. More stuff, more problems. Going tiny is a very comfortable way of living. And I know that a lot of people, including us, want to have less of an impact on where we're living, less of a carbon footprint. You know, we really want to make sure that, you know, that's why we try and use as many off-grid appliances and stuff that we can. We don't want to be plugged in. We don't want to be contributing to the problem.
So if we're talking about tiny houses, there's one thing that I think is important to note. I think their tool as something that you can shoehorn in here and there and more efficiently use land in appropriate locations and use them as a way to achieve some affordable housing that's integrated into some different housing, I think makes a lot of sense.
Esmeralda Soria, I'm Fresno City Council member for District 1. We are in the city of Fresno. We're the 5th largest city in the state of California and growing.
We are Pat and Nick Mosley from California Tiny House. We live in Fresno, California, and we started a tiny house business here in our hometown. We did work for a gentleman named Dan Fitzpatrick, and when he found out we were doing tiny houses, he just was way excited. He's really into it. So he suggested that we invite the mayor and the council people down here to take a look because it's a business in Fresno.
I'm Dan Fitzpatrick, and for the past 40 years I've spent probably an equal amount of time in both municipal government and in land development activities as a private developer. So for approximately 25, 30 years I was moving from city to city as a city manager, county administrator, and in all of those locations, whether it was Las Vegas or in the Central Valley of California, all of the planning, development, public works, utilities, all of the development departments were under my jurisdiction. And I even spent 7 years as a redevelopment director doing inner city urban renewal, infill housing. So I have a pretty good understanding of the nature of land development, both on the side of the desk as a municipal administrator, but also on the other side of the desk being a developer, going to the municipal folks to get the various approvals. Well, I've been interested in what I'll call small lot development since 2003 and did a tremendous amount of research on lot sizes and what kind of housing one can build on those lots. And so it's always been an area I was very interested in, and then when this small or tiny housing movement began, it certainly perked up my ears because this makes sense from my point of view of both in my capacity as a developer of getting more units on acre and in my days in doing redevelopment and urban renewal for affordable housing. Friends of mine began a tiny home construction business. We immediately hooked up. They know the construction end, and I know the land use end of things. So we've been, working together for the past year on, both building it and, okay, how do you now site, tiny homes?
So when I first came on board as a newly elected official, Pat and Nick actually invited me to visit their business because their business is located in my district in the northern part. And so I had the opportunity to go and scope out what the work that they were doing, and was very excited about it. Didn't know what would happen from my visit, but shortly thereafter I was contacted again by them because they knew that we were going through kind of a revamp of our development code and our zoning here in the city of Fresno, a total wide revamp. We hadn't updated it since I think in the last 50 years. And so there was an opportunity to include this type of housing option in our development code. I think it's a fantastic idea to see if we can propose it. If we can work through it, I contacted our administration and I worked through staff, and they loved the idea. And so it was really a team effort in incorporating language that would allow us to have a tiny house as a second dwelling. And I only see it as a first step, actually, and I'm pretty excited just kind of the synergy that has been built on the issue.
Well, the city of Fresno, I think, has been sort of on the cutting edge of providing language in their ordinance to allow not only tiny homes, and they call them backyard cottages, as second dwelling units, but also allowing tiny home on wheels. And again, that's very well defined. It has to meet the same design criteria, as a stick-built, tiny home. It has to look like a tiny home. It has to match the neighborhood, the community, the principal, residents. When it's parked on the property, all of the chassis and wheels need to be, screened, and it has to meet ANSI code requirements, and be licensed by the Department of Motor, Vehicles through their normal standards. Because that standard is important because it relates to the weight and size and so forth on a particular trailer. It's also a safety issue. It is an allowable permitted use on any property that's 6,000 square feet or greater, and it's and on lots, if they're a corner lot, if they're only 5,000 square feet. So it gives a city the size of Fresno, which is 500,000 people, gives tens of thousands of options, for folks to have a second dwelling unit on their property that is permitted by law now.
Another big thing that a lot of people don't know is not only can you rent the house that's placed in your backyard, but you could actually live in the tiny house in your backyard, rent the big house out, and pay for their tiny house with that payment.
I do believe this could provide an opportunity for us to address some of the affordable housing issues that we have here in the city of Fresno, because we definitely do. But I think it provides a wide range of opportunity for young millennials that are still in college or graduating, young people that just want to live in smaller spaces. I know that there are a number of folks here, and retirees. So I think it fits all sorts of different needs that exist within our community.
Well, the biggest thing for affordable housing, one cannot build affordable housing in any community practically in the United States without major money, subsidy from state, federal, or local government, or combinations thereof, right? It's just, you add up all of those costs, and it just becomes too expensive to build it and then rent it out. You not only don't make a profit, you lose money. But what's unique about tiny homes and tiny home on wheels as second dwelling units versus as a separate community is there are no costs per se. It's already a lot. It already has water, sewer, electricity, and gas to it. The city is already providing city services and the roads and the police and fire to that subdivision, right? There are no additional costs to the developer other than putting in, digging a trench to put in the utilities out to the, tiny home in one's backyard. And you don't need any now government subsidies. You can literally have hundreds of tiny homes all over the community in backyards of second dwelling units that then are affordable. It's one of the quickest and cheapest ways of providing through the private market affordable housing. There's no government subsidy required, even though it would be nice if they would streamline certain permitting processes to help that and cut maybe some of the fees. But in general, all of the stuff is there already. Here's a way municipalities throughout the United States can create affordable housing overnight by just amending their ordinance and being creative on second dwelling units in existing neighborhoods.
Well, the main reason that they wanted to put an RV certification home in the backyard is for safety. Once you get a certification like that, it's all about safety. So you have egress fire windows, you have smoke alarms, you have fire extinguishers, which a builder without that wouldn't have to follow those ordinances.
The California Bulletin was sort of an advisory to all municipalities in the state of California, saying that tiny homes are taking root throughout the state, and that it's important the municipalities to make sure they're built in accordance with basic health and safety codes. And those codes vary depending on how they're built. For example, a stick-built house or a modular type house is covered by the International Building Code. A mobile home type tiny home or manufactured housing is covered by HUD standards. And what's good is they recognize that there are tiny homes on wheels, RVs. I mean, that's still technically how they're licensed, but they meet health and safety code requirements through ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, which provides very detailed health and safety, fire code standards, electrical, plumbing, etc. for tiny homes and tiny homes on wheels in particular. if we're a municipality, how do we know that this home has been built under ANSI standards? And there are several firms in the United States that do certify the tiny home on wheels that they have in fact met ANSI construction requirements. One is Pacific West. I think they're out of Idaho. Currently, right now, RVIA also does certification. It's got to be a recognized firm that has, that certification. But also that certification, remember, also carries some legal liability. I mean, the big concern a lot of municipalities have is if they allow one to put a tiny home on wheels on property in their jurisdiction, and let's say there's some accident, fire, plumbing problem, whatever, health and safety issue, unless they've required meeting ANSI standards and that you've had someone certify that met ANSI standards, they, the municipality, could be legally liable.
All of our houses are just regular stick-built houses. They happen to be on a trailer, so they could be remodeled in 20 years, if they're outdated or something like that.
Tiny home on wheels under most state laws are still considered an RV, even though that's like comparing apples to oranges. So slowly but surely the codes are changing to recognize that fact that these are built to a different level of standard for habitability and normal daily living. So quite frankly, no one's paying a lot of attention to whether one's living in it full time or not. The real issue at the local level is, how do I differentiate this product from a normal RV? And the simple answer is you define it. You define that, yes, under state law, this is still a travel trailer or recreational vehicle. That's how it's licensed and it meets ANSI standards. But you're now saying that it needs to be built and look like a conventional housing, a conventional backyard cottage, of which a conventional RV doesn't look. And that you have to meet all the normal design criteria that municipality has for the same unit but built on a slab. An RV sticks out like a sore thumb. I mean, it looks like an RV, versus a tiny home on wheels looks like a tiny home. It looks like a backyard cottage or a bungalow. It just happens to be on wheels.
Actually, one of my friends serves in the city of Stockton. I don't know if they've moved forward with it, but he contacted me because he saw it on my Facebook. And he's like, hey, so how did you guys do it? What is the language that you guys use? So I forwarded that to him very happily. If we can really set the trend, we were happy to do that and be able to be helpful.
We'd like to keep talking to Councilmember Soria, get Fresno, to keep expanding, and the rest of California.
Having it as a second dwelling is a great start, but I think that there may be future opportunities to look at maybe even having tiny home subdivisions. How do we look at those parcels, even city-owned parcels, right, that go underutilized, that are vacant? Right now there's a big movement with our downtown and revitalization. How can we incorporate the concept of tiny homes and tiny spaces, right, and really maximize and build density within our community, but also provide diversity of options in terms of housing?
So looking at it from the point of view of, let's say I want to have a tiny home community. Let's forget tiny home on wheels, right now. As a developer, you got to look at all of the aspects of, I call it, does it still pencil? Does it make sense from a market? One of my favorite sayings says wishful thinking doesn't make a market. I can wish I had a tiny home community. If a developer can't make a profit on it, guess what? They're not going to do it. It's real simple. So, and number two is what many times happens is municipal, codes drive up those costs. There's, in essence, three factors that go into the cost or the final cost of selling a unit or renting a unit. And that's what's the cost of the land, what's the cost of all the fees and infrastructure to support those units, and then the actual building, cost alone. Well, I mean, if you have fees of $20,000 to $30,000 per lot per unit for a tiny home that only costs you $60,000 to $70,000 to begin with, I mean, you've driven up costs, and that doesn't even include now putting in the water, sewer, roads, street lights, all of the infrastructure necessary to support, the project. So it's going to take, I think, early on, at least in California, and I think this is happening in some other states like Florida and I think Colorado, maybe North Carolina, where they're doing some, lack of a better word, model, trying some different things. Let's take 2 acres in a particular area and come up with a model code that only relates to those 2 acres. What works, in there? How do you lay it out? What are the, issues? Because you have a lot of folks saying, well, let's just put them here. Do that. Well, that's nice, but you start putting in sewer like that, you just dramatically raise the cost of doing that subdivision. Or how do I get how do I get a fire truck, to the units? Let alone, servicing, garbage disposal, etc. So these are all the things that go into the development of a model community, a model code, and I think a couple cities are going to have to try some different things and see what works, and try to get the creativity of both the city, planning staff and the private sector, folks together on what's the best way of mixing and matching those things that at the end is, cost effective.
It's exciting that this is what community is about. It's about listening to your local constituents, to the business owners, to see that the work that they're doing and see how we can partner up so that we can really support that and build on that, because not only does it provide a potential opportunity for affordable housing to meet the needs of our community, but it also supports business, it creates more jobs, and so there's a ripple effect, and I believe that we all benefit.
Well, I was contacted by the tiny home community in Ojai in my capacity as the state of California representative to the American Tiny Home Association. Asked if I would come down as a quote-unquote expert to talk to the Planning Commission about amending their ordinance that would permit tiny home on wheels to be a permitted use in addition to what they already have in their ordinance, which are backyard cottages, bungalows, tiny homes.
My name is Vina Lustado, and I'm in Ojai, California, and I'm a tiny house designer, builder, and dweller.
I'm Chester Jagiello. I am a project manager at heart. I'm a general manager of a fairly large construction company. We build large, substantial estate-type homes, as you can see behind me, and been in business for 30 years, and our reputation is very good here in the valley, in the Ojai Valley.
When I was at the Jamboree in Colorado Springs last year, it was a really great opportunity to meet like-minded people like yourself and all these amazing people in the tiny house movement that I knew just from the internet, but never really connected in person. So I got to meet some fabulous folks. And from there, I knew I wanted to have some kind of opportunity to figure out how to deal with zoning, because that's such a big issue in the tiny house world, to legalize the whole aspect of living legally in a tiny house. And I had met Lena Menard and Lee Pera, and I knew that they had a lot of experience with that because they gave a talk at the Jamboree about forming communities, tiny house communities in their areas. So I invited them to come to Ojai to give a little workshop. And I invited 2 planning commission members to attend because they're a big role in helping to change the zoning codes.
In Colorado, last year when she came back, that there was 4,000 people expected and 40,000 people show up to this tiny home convention. That just blew my mind. So when she had the seminar here, or the workshop, I came and I learned a lot about the movement, where that is going. And so I'm at the workshop, and the inspiration came, well, if we were able to allow for tiny homes to be a second dwelling in the city of Ojai, that would certainly create an inventory of affordable housing by design. Because of the size of the structure, it was affordable by design. We didn't have to regulate it any other way. Whereas Section 8 and other government-assisted housing are all regulated by government associations, grants that you get. And so that they're able to, they cost taxpayers money nationally because that's how they're able to keep the rents low. However, having a tiny home in a backyard, by design, they're small, the rents can only be so much. So that was the impetus that led to the idea of considering tiny homes as second dwellings.
Well, we have a lot of seniors in our community, actually. It's probably dominant on the senior end. But we also have, a large workforce, and a lot of those people can't afford to live here. So they live out of Ojai and then they commute in. Well, then what does that mean? There's traffic, there's more pollution, cars on the road, and what have you. And then we also have a big art community. We have, different artists and people coming in to City Council periodically and to Planning Commission and saying, hey, I can't afford to live here. I want to live here. It's an art community, but I can't afford to live here.
The realization is that what we're doing here in Ojai is something that every jurisdiction has to face, not just us. The tiny home as a second dwelling is probably the most feasible, logical, expediently implementable, if that's not even a word, but we could make that happen so quickly and so fast that it will fulfill a certain need for that level of income bracket. Now, is everybody going to live in a tiny home? No, but and it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve affordable housing issues, but it's one aspect that every community has available to them.
On the agenda, our continuing discussion on the second unit dwelling ordinance, and in addition to our discussion, we're going to have a guest presentation. And that will be Dan Fitzpatrick. He helped put together the Fresno ordinance. It's just a really good opportunity to gather information, let the public ask questions, get more information, and then help us in our furthering or getting closer to making a recommendation to City Council.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission and city staff. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this discussion on tiny homes as a means for affordable housing.
Each city has to be approached, differently and based on their particular goals and needs. What I'm going to do is do a quick PowerPoint presentation this evening on, I call it tiny is the next big thing.
The point is that Fresno created the template, right? They're like one of the first ones in the state to get this going. And so even though, sure, that's a huge city and we're a little town, it doesn't really matter. The point of it is they went through the legislative body and got the ordinance, and now they're willing to share the template with us.
What if you can go to the counter, the permit counter, the building and safety here in the city of Ojai, say, I have a lot that qualifies for a second dwelling. I submit an application, and because tiny homes are ANSI regulated, which is a different department, they're not uniform building codes, all they have to do is bring in the ANSI certificate, a picture of their home, a site plan, and over the counter, get a permit. And within 30 days, opposed to 6 months, if you apply minimum, where you have to hire an architect, you have to hire an engineer, you have to go through all the permitting process. The cost of all that is, there's $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 just to go through that process. Within 30 days, they could be on that lot, living in their home, and solving the issue. Because the rent then, and as Dan projected, you take the same investment. Now, instead of 150 to 200,000, you're talking about $80 to $95,000. That $80 to $95,000, if that's costed out over a period of time, comes to $750 a month rent, which in this area, again, I don't know where this is being filmed, in some places that's still outrageous, but in California, that's fantastic. If you can spend $750 and be a couple and live in a tiny home, and if that's the lifestyle that you want, then that's cheap rent around here.
Diane Squire.
I'm an artist. I'm a digital artist, work with hardscape and landscape contractors, doing 2D and 3D designs, self-employed, and I need other options. I would love to stay here. I contribute to the community, and I'm being priced out. And so I'm asking you to please allow other options.
So there you go. You'll that same person, now the person that owns the home, that's an affordable investment. That's $750 rent, which is considered affordable here in this area, has a return of 10% on their money. So not only are they wanting to do it, they have a return on their investment. And if you take an old retirement couple, even a conservative investment like T-bills, you're talking 5%. Okay, you're doubling your investment. You're creating a housing. You're creating affordable housing opportunity for someone. And do you think more people are going to do it? Of course, people will do it.
Good evening. My name's Cynthia Greer. I'm a local business owner. I have Ecologic Lifestyle Design at 530 West Ojai Avenue. I would love to be able to live in the village of Ojai, but I can no longer afford to do that, so I've moved out into the valley area. I wanted to just make this point because I think part of the bread and butter of this community is small business owners, and I think there's a lot of small business owners here just struggling to be able to live anywhere in the valley. A lot of the shop owners up and down the arcade, retail people especially, have a difficult time of it. So on top of the artists, the millennials, the baby boomers, the small business owners, we are the majority here, and we do need affordable housing. I think tiny houses are a great way to do it.
Because the city council, the two members that were there at the meeting, were so impressed by the presentation of Dan Fitzpatrick that they, right on the spot, asked him to do a presentation to the city council. Once it goes to the city council and they see the same presentation, they're going to then direct us to either include the tiny homes as a possibility or not.
Microphone on. Call the meeting to order for Ojai City Council. Regular meeting 7 p.m., June 28th, 2016.
But I also wanted to point out that we've added something new, and that is the tiny homes. And we'd like to get that permitted as a legal second dwelling unit. Depending on how your discussion goes and what you agree on and what you recommend, what we'd like to see is for it to come back to Planning Commission, and then we would take it and further defined amendments, and then of course bring it back to you again.
Debbie Godfrey.
Thank you, council members. I am speaking to the tiny house. I'd like to advocate for you to move forward on permitting them in whatever streamlined fashions they're describing. I've been a member of this community for 16 years. I've lived in the city for about 11 of that, and in the surrounding area the rest of the time. And I could never afford to buy a home here. And right now I reside here because I have a friend who rents me a room in her home on Park Road, and I've been there for a little over a year. And so when Vina started making tiny homes and describing them, I thought that's a way I could actually stay in Ojai.
I want to address the tiny homes. I think it's obviously a slam dunk for us to direct the Planning Commission to start adding the standards and the definitions to what that means. I think that I have no issue with it. I've seen the presentation. I hear the support from the community. I think it's a valid option for the city of Ojai.
And then obviously tiny houses are going to be their own element, but they need to be flushed out. They need to be brought back. I think it's pretty simple because I think the start here is wonderful. And I just think they have to review it based on the comments that we've had tonight from the community as well as ourselves. And then just go back and think about what we've said tonight, and that's think about affordability, think about increasing housing stock, remove impediments for development, look at lot size.
We have to look at everything. We have to look at traffic, parking, aesthetic compatibility, of course, is it up to code, all of that. So we can't just, look at, oh yay, tiny houses. It feels like things could move faster, but because of that, because we have to look at all the implications, like I said, pro and con, opportunities and constraints, that's why things probably take a little bit longer, because we want to make sure if we're passing an ordinance or recommending the ordinance rather, we've done our homework, we've done our due diligence, and we've looked at everything.
I just think that tiny homes are an important component. I hope we get more, I hope I can convince my colleagues to get more aggressive in terms of looking at maybe the possibility of a tiny home village demonstration project. And I really think we should look at ways to allow second units and tiny homes in a way that doesn't be unduly restrictive and doesn't break the bank.
Having community is economically practical in a lot of ways. Sharing resources just makes sense. It's going to be a prototype of a way of life that is attractive to many and is beneficial to our planet and to our community. The city of Ojai has lots available that they've put aside for affordable housing uses. I've had conversations, and they're only conversations, about the possibility of doing a prototype under educational condition whereby it's experimental. So that really works with tiny homes, because guess what? They are mobile. So if it doesn't work for any reason, we can pull them out.
Some open shelves and then hanging racks.
If tiny houses were legalized here in Ojai, it would give a lot of people that are single or a couple, they want to simplify their lives. I think it just brings about a different option for some people that are interested in making the change and living simply and having a smaller footprint and practicing mindful living. It's good stuff. I mean, if the city can get on board, it's going to bring about a bunch of momentum towards it. And me as a builder, it's going to be good, because then I could keep creating these houses and just keep making art, really.
So changing local ordinances, and this is what we're doing in Ojai, is what's necessary, and it paves the way for other communities to do it. So yeah, because there aren't that many tiny home friendly communities, sure, people will be attracted to Ojai, but that's not the point. The point is I really think that we're just breaking ground for all those other communities to adjust their second dwelling laws, like Fresno did, like Portland did, like the community in Florida, and now maybe Ojai or other communities. And cities, jurisdictions are copycats. We're the best copycats in the world, because if somebody else already did it, why reinvent the wheel?
Travel rivers and roads, long dirt paths, whiskey holes, taught me near everything known House in autumn feel waiting for something to light me up. I've been living in the dark, giving up before I start. Something's gotta spark. Oh, oh, oh. I've been living with the sin, giving up but giving in. Something's gotta win. Oh, oh, oh. I've been living in the dark, giving up before I start. Something's gotta spark. Ooh, I've been living with the sin, giving up but giving in. Something's gotta win.